Guys, tickets for the January 15th Nature Has Flavor Cooking and Lifestyle Seminar are officially available. We have limited spots, so you want to get these sooner rather than later. This is your chance to get hands-on cooking lessons from professional plant-based chefs. The event is taking place in Manhattan, and if you're looking to do some early Christmas shopping, a ticket to this event will be life-changing to anyone in your life who is passionate about food or who is simply looking to get healthier. Guys, you're going to prepare your own incredible plant-based meal and dessert. You're also going to take home a copy of our cookbook, Cooking Your Way to a Healthier Life, so you can continue to implement your new culinary skills. Head on over to naturehasflavor.com and get your spot today. Our podcast guest today is Victoria Moran. Victoria has been one of the most influential vegans of the past 40 years thanks to her wide-ranging talents and tireless dedication to the vegan lifestyle. Among Moran's many credentials, she's the best-selling author of 12 books. She's the host of the Main Street Vegan podcast. She's the founder of the Main Street Vegan Academy, which trains vegan lifestyle coaches. She has involvement in 2 upcoming film projects, which we talk about today. And perhaps most importantly, she's incredibly down-to-earth, friendly, and fun to talk to. So I know you're going to enjoy today's podcast, and I will talk to you guys soon. So Victoria, thanks so much for coming on. How are you today?
I'm pretty good. How are you, Danny?
I'm doing really well. We're very excited to have you on the show. So you've been involved in the vegan scene now for 32 years, and you've not only seen the rapid growth of the movement, you've been a big reason that the growth has happened. In what ways have you seen the vegan movement change and grow since you first became a vegan?
Oh, wow. Well, actually, I really became involved when I was still vegetarian, which happened in, oh my gosh, your people are going to think I'm an antique, but that was 1969.
Wow.
And it was shortly thereafter that I really wanted to be vegan, even though it seemed weird, but I'm very much an animal person. And as soon as I understood that we were taking milk that ought to go to baby cows and that little chicks were being murdered because they had no use in an egg operation if they were male, I so wanted to do this, but I was a practicing binge eater. And it was really hard to go to the 7-Eleven in the middle of the night looking for my stash, and I'd read those labels, and everything seemed to have egg albumin or whey in it. And vegan was so hard for me. So it actually took me a number of years to really make it. And I would do things like vegan at home and stuff like that. But yeah, I finally did make it to vegan in 1983 because I had gotten recovery for my eating disorder. I needed to do the whole treat yourself like an addict and get your insides taken care of. And once that happened, I finally, maybe for the first time in my life, had the power of choice over what I would eat. And once I had that, I knew it was vegan. That was really very much a part of my soul. So you asked about the movement. So from my observations for really over 40 years, it is phenomenal. I mean, just the idea, there was a time when even being vegetarian was just weird. I remember in my hometown of Kansas City, Missouri, when they put in the first salad bar, and I thought they did it just for me because there were so few, even vegetarians, that I remember going on the radio when I was 19 years old and being this expert on being vegetarian when I'd only been at it for 6-8 months. But it was just weird. And then vegan, oh my goodness, it had been around obviously since 1944 when the Vegan Society started in the UK, but the growth was so slow. And then the American Vegan Society was founded in 1960. And every time I think about that, I'm just in awe that these people were so far forward thinking that they thought that the United States needed a vegan society, but that was it. That was all there was for such a long time. So those were the people who made me vegan and who provided all the information to me and to other people who in those days were getting this, but very few people were involved. Almost nobody had heard of it. Almost nobody could even pronounce the word. And when I went to college late, so we're talking the early 80s, I went to the UK on a fellowship to study vegans because there were so few here. You couldn't study them here.
Wow.
You could travel all over and maybe you'd meet, I don't know, 30 maybe, but because it had started in England, there were more of them there and it was closer together. So I got to meet some of those early vegans who had been around in the 1940s. And even then, it was such a rarity, and now it is a viable movement. It is a powerful movement, and what's so exciting about it is that there are so many aspects. So we've got the original compassionate living animal rights part, and that whole thing, when you look at PETA and Mercy for Animals, and that HSUS is now talking about food and farmed animals, that's huge. Then we've got the whole health thing with the heart disease and all of the other great scientific studies saying this is the way to eat. The environmental thing, cowspiracy has changed so many people, and then all these kind of subsets, fashion, cruelty-free makeup, and cuisine, and great chefs. I never dreamed we would be where we are today. Not far enough, but we're getting there.
Yeah, it's truly amazing how mainstream plant-based eating is becoming and how mainstream veganism is becoming. You know, I have been fortunate enough to kind of grow up in this internet era where it's become a lot more normalized, but I would imagine that it was almost polarizing back in the 80s and the 90s when it wasn't as common. Did you find any difficulties being vegan at a time where it wasn't as socially acceptable?
What's interesting is in some ways it was more difficult because we didn't have all the convenience foods. But in another way, I find it so interesting these days that people separate vegan and plant-based. Now, we used to separate, we would say health vegan and ethical vegan, because there were some people who just did this for their health and they wore leather shoes and whatever. And so those were the health vegans. But everybody had to be a kind of health vegan because there was nothing else to eat. I mean, okay, we had potato chips and Diet Coke, but basically we were eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds because there was nothing else. So nowadays people talk about plant-based, as if that's the healthy, and then, just kind of vegan, you like animals, but you can eat any kind of junk. So that's really new and different. So yes, it's much easier nowadays. You can go into any coffee bar and get soy milk, almond milk, coconut milk. When there was a time, you just couldn't do that. And so, yeah, it's easier, but you also have to be a bit more discerning. And if you really want to be healthy and feel great and look great, you got to eat more like I was forced to eat back in the 80s.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it is very easy now to be a junk food vegan. We have Stop and Shops here up in Massachusetts, and I think they extend down all the way to New York. They have a whole section full of great vegan junk food, and I have to carefully walk by every time and make sure I don't veer too far into that section, and I find myself in the produce section instead. But I think that's really interesting that those options weren't available, and you spent so long just eating the basics, and obviously your health has benefited very much as a result. One thing I want to talk about, you have a lot of projects in the works, you're the host of your own podcast, and we're going to link all of these projects in the show notes. You have a movie that you've written that's in pre-production called Miss Liberty. Tell our listeners a little bit more about that project and how it came to be and when we can expect it to be released to the public.
Okay. Well, Miss Liberty was actually my husband's idea. And that in itself is a very sweet story because when I met him, he had never even met a vegetarian. It had just never crossed his mind. I was actually widowed very young, and I'd been single for about 9 years when I met William. And I'd always dated, I wanted to date spiritual vegetarians. And they were spiritual and they were vegetarian and they all tended to be kind of fragile. I don't know. So I thought, well, you know what? Just date somebody normal and see what happens. It's not like you're going to get married. I mean, you are 46, which at the time I thought was old. So I met him And he was very polite. The first few weeks we went to ethnic restaurants, and he ate vegetarian and I ate vegan, and life was good. But then after 2 weeks, he did decide that he was not going to eat meat anymore. And I didn't push the vegan thing because I thought, just the fact that he's not eating meat or fish, that's pretty wonderful. But a few years later, we were at a farm sanctuary gala, and he saw something about a cow and a calf being separated. So he stopped drinking milk, and he had drunk a lot of milk before that. So that was a big leap. And then when he read Main Street Vegan, my 2012 book that has kind of made my brand these days, then he said, okay, now I get it. Now I completely get it. Now I'm completely vegan. Never another cheese pizza. He replaced all his shoes and belts and wallets and that. So that is a little background on the person who really created Miss Liberty. He took a month off and went upstate to be near Farm Sanctuary because he'd never been around cows, but he had this idea of a story of a cow who escapes from a slaughterhouse somewhere out in the Midwest, and the slaughterhouse is out of regulation on the way they treat their workers and even what animal welfare regulations do exist. It's a really nasty place. So the lawyer in the town has been trying to get them for a long time, but this cow wanders into the yard of the computer tech who just did a lot of work for the slaughterhouse, and they have not paid him. So he calls his lawyer and says, I'm keeping this cow until they pay me. So in hopes of getting them on all their other violations, the local lawyer calls his friend in New York City, Patricia Levinson, who is known in the press as Cow Patty because she does all this pro bono animal rights work. And she comes out to see what can be done. And it is, and I can say this because I came in later as a co-writer, but all the brilliance really belongs to my husband, William Melton. This is such a gripping story. It's a family feature film. There are a couple of kids in it. You could bring kids. Kids would love it, but it's not a children's movie.
Right.
And this is what makes it so exciting because there has never been a feature film with an animal rights message and a vegan protagonist, except one from about 12 years ago called Year of the Dog, in which the vegan is unstable and embezzles money from her company. I mean, it's just, and then eventually just goes off to Mexico because she can't deal with regular life, kind of like some of those guys I used to date. And so this is a film where the people are really real, and it has a surprise ending like M. Night Shyamalan back when he was really great. So it is a cool movie. The interesting thing, and this is a whole new world for me and for one of my little side companies, which is Main Street Vegan Productions, is I've never done anything that took a whole lot of other people's money. And a feature film does do that. So we are working with Choice Films. They've made a lot of movies. They're getting into the thing when we two people who are at the helm over there were doing the wheat belly diet and just practically living on meat. But by the time they started seeing some of the clips from Mercy for Animals and they watched Cowspiracy, they have made it to pescatarian. So it's cool how we influence people. So the bottom line is we need $1 million. We really only need $700,000 because we're going to be filming in a place that has tax rebates. So yeah, if we had $700,000 today, we would be filming. But I believe that within a year, it's going to happen. So we are, certainly looking for funding. There's Choice Films has a deal with an investment firm where there's a way to invest that actually much of the money goes into municipal bonds, so people are guaranteed to get their money back, whether the film is profitable or not. So we just need to find the right person who believes in Miss Liberty, and it's going to be dashing. It really is. It's a wonderful, wonderful story, and thank you for asking about it.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a fantastic plot line. I really hope the movie does come to fruition, and it sounds like you guys are absolutely on the right path for that. You've definitely taken veganism into areas that people haven't really explored before, and there really is so much out there that can be done. I think that's one thing that's really defined your career. I know you've met a lot of celebrities over the years. You've been on Oprah. You've met Muhammad Ali. What has been your I guess, perception of celebrities' take on veganism? How has the vegan movement been received by some of the world's most famous people?
Well, I think it's been amazing. And obviously, we live in a country that doesn't have royalty, but there's something in the human psyche that needs royalty. So we've created royalty out of celebrities. And it's really fascinating. Probably the first celebrities that I met were the Beatles. When I was 14 years old, I had a $1 press card from a teen magazine, and I got into my first Beatles press conference when I was 14, my second Beatles press conference at 15. And when I was 17, I befriended one of their managers and was introduced to Paul McCartney at a little disco in London called Bag of Nails. And Paul McCartney ordered drinks for all of us. And I remember thinking, I may die because I've never had a drink in my life. And this man just ordered me a double Scotch and Coke. But even if I perish, I mean, I'm with a Beatle, so I've lived a full life. And interestingly enough, this was before I was vegetarian. This was before Sir Paul was vegetarian. But now, we both, he in his, giant way and myself in my little way, are really changing the world for animals, changing the way people eat. It's so exciting. Oprah, bless her heart, she's just like, at one time I used to call her Empress of the Universe, and I think she's, still pretty much up there with a network and everything. And she's really stressing veganism, with Kathy Freston, and Oprah came out, at least telling people, please meatless Mondays, at least that. And a lot of vegans can get a little holier than that and say, oh, meatless Mondays, then you're only being terrible 6 days a week. But you know what? If enough people meatless Monday, huge changes happen environmentally. I mean, we're already slaughtering 500 million fewer animals than we were. That is a lot of beings who aren't raised in a terrible system. And it's not because everybody's becoming vegan. That's because a whole lot of people are doing it a little bit. So you talk about celebrities. And I know Leonardo DiCaprio now has a new film about climate. I really admire these people because they don't have to do anything. They've got everything they want. They're living in the ivory tower, and yet many of the celebrities are just really living to make the planet better, and that's very cool.
Yeah, it is really cool. It's amazing to see so many people you would never expect in a million years to take on this lifestyle now, all of a sudden promoting veganism and seeing just how valuable it can be, not only for the people's health, but also for the environment. There are just so many broad implications it can have for the whole world. So outside of Miss Liberty, you do have your own podcast. You've written 12 books. You always have a lot of logs in the fire. What else is coming up next for you and for Main Street Vegan?
Thank you. Well, there's a lot. So there's another film, and it's a documentary, and that's very cool. I think the reason we have all these amazing vegan documentaries and other great documentaries out in the world too is because they're so cheap. They don't need $1 million or more. So I'm working with Thomas Wade Jackson on the Compassion Project, and this is a beautiful, beautiful film that is to interest people of faith, people who are religious or spiritual in any kind of tradition in the vegan lifestyle. So he's nearly finished. He needs to go to Marrakech, Morocco next month to the UN climate conference, where there are going to be lots of religious leaders from around the world. And once he gets that piece in, then he's going to go into the editing phase. So I think the Compassion Project will be out in the world next year. So if people want to Google the Compassion Project, it's on Twitter at Compassion Movie. There's a GoFundMe. You can just do GoFundMe at the Compassion Project, and you can watch the trailer, which is absolutely stunning. I'm so proud to be part of this project. And then there is the weekly podcast. We're a live radio show on Wednesday afternoons at 3 o'clock Eastern Time on unity.fm. And immediately afterwards, that goes up as a podcast on iTunes and Stitcher and all over the place. We've been going since June of 2012, so we have just extraordinary archives, and it's the most fun, as I'm sure you find, doing your podcast, getting to talk with all these people. And
That's
some of them are very big, big in the movement, big in the world. So we've had Neil Barnard and Colin Campbell and Russell Simmons, but some of the people are not famous at all, but they're just incredibly interesting. So recently we had the woman from a tiny town in rural Canada who rescued a lobster from the supermarket. And it's such a sweet story because so many people, people who don't think that much about animals, people who eat whatever they eat, they see one lone lobster there in the supermarket and their heart just goes out. And this woman figured out how to pack him properly, UPS him to another animal activist in a part of Canada that is near the ocean where these lobsters came from. And it's just such a fascinating story. So I love doing the podcast, and that's called Main Street Vegan. Pretty much everything I do is called Main Street Vegan. And then one of the most fun things, and I think most far-reaching, is Main Street Vegan Academy. And that also started in June of 2012. That must have been a month. I should have checked my astrology, and it would have said, watch it, your whole life is going to change. But Main Street Vegan Academy is a very exciting in-person 6-day program here in New York City that trains and certifies vegan lifestyle coaches and educators. So it's not a how to go vegan program. It's a program for people who are already doing this to make it a business, to really get out there in the world. And I'm so proud of my graduates because in addition to those who are working one-on-one and with groups as coaches and educators, we have so many people who have tapped into their entrepreneurial sense. So one of our graduates is Kat Mendenhall, who has a vegan cowboy boot company in Dallas, Texas.
Oh, wow.
Kat Mendenhall Boots. And these boots are amazing. I mean, I didn't know there was this long tradition of custom-made, upscale cowboy boots. There are only 35 of these custom boot makers left in the world. She contacted all 35 of them, and only 2 were willing to work with non-animal materials.
Wow.
And she's found wonderful materials. The materials are U.S. sourced. The boots are Texas made. So that's a very cool success story, and she was inspired to do that here at the Academy. We've also got Riverdale Cheese, a beautiful fromagerie in Brooklyn. J.L. Fields is one of our graduates, and she's written a couple of cookbooks. She's got a radio show and does executive coaching. She had a client who was a general in the U.S. Army, and now he's vegan. And she had another Army guy who knew him, and he said, yeah, if it was up to him, the whole Army would be vegan. So we're really reaching out. We've got graduates from 15 countries, and they come here and have this incredible immersion experience with fabulous field trips, because New York City is kind of Disneyland for vegans. So we do that 4 times a year. We've got an advanced class for graduates coming up next year, our first master's level program. So it's cool. It's kind of like having a whole lot of grandchildren out there in the world doing wonderful things. I have 250 vegan lifestyle coaches and educators who have gone out from Main Street Vegan Academy to do cool stuff in the world. It's a great feeling.
I think that's another great way to just, extend the reach of the vegan movement. You obviously do a lot yourself, but there's obviously so much more that can be done when you're working with other people. It's definitely a team effort all around, and that's something that I've experienced even on this podcast. Everyone seems to want to help each other, and we're all kind of in this movement together, and it's a very cool thing. It's a very cool thing to be a part of. One thing we ask all guests here on this podcast, since we're very much a food-based company, if you could have a dream 3-course meal with absolutely no restrictions whatsoever, what would that consist of?
Wow, 3-course meal. Okay. Well, the first course, I think I am going to have the fabulous artichoke appetizer at Candle Cafe West, Candle 79 here in New York City, the 3 beautiful candle restaurants. And I think all of them have this wonderful artichoke appetizer. So that would be the first. And then for a main course, I have a fantasy memory. It seems like a fantasy because it was so long ago. It was back in the 1970s, and we were doing a road trip out west, and so hard to get vegan food. I mean, really difficult. So I was having a lot of toast on that trip. But we wound up in Spokane, Washington, and there was a vegetarian restaurant that had the most exquisite mushroom stroganoff. Now, you have a lot of meals in your life, and most of them you completely forget. But that mushroom stroganoff was so good. I remember it to this day, and that would be the second course. And the third course would be very simple. I love raw desserts because that is a guaranteed way to make sure that even the course is whole food. And I love a cookbook, a cookless book, called Raw Food Made Easy for 1 or 2 People by Jennifer Kornbleet. And one of her recipes is a raw chocolate cake that you can make in about 5 minutes. It's based on walnuts, cocoa, and you do want to get good cruelty-free, slavery-free cocoa, because a lot of the cocoa is it's human abuse to get it. So you want to go online. I get mine from Frontier Co-op, order that good slavery-free cocoa. And then the raw chocolate cake also has dates. So it's basically dates, walnuts, and cocoa, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of water, and it's so good and guiltless. So there's my meal.
Well, that all sounds fantastic. We'll have to send you a copy of our cookbook just so you can see what Leroy Meller, our chef, his take on plant-based cooking and plant-based eating. It's some of the best food I've ever had, so we'll definitely send that to you. Victoria, thank you so much for coming on today. Is there anything else you want to say to our listeners in closing?
Well, I guess I just want to share the coolest thing that's happened to me lately, and that is that last week, Dr. Joel Kahn, wonderful cardiologist in the Detroit area, you can check him out. He's America's holistic heart doc, and I were voted PETA's sexiest vegans over 50.
Oh, wow.
So that means that this year we will be going out representing PETA and carrying the message of health and harmlessness and environmental sanity all over everywhere. So that's a really exciting thing. And I am 66. So to get a distinction like that at this age is just the coolest thing ever. And I'm one happy camper. So hope to run into some of your listeners in person one of these days.
I can't wait to see what's in store next for you and for Main Street Vegan. Victoria, thank you so much.
Thanks so much. It was fun.